Welcome everyone to my YouTube channel, Video Chess Training. I'm International Master William Paschall, and this is part 4 of my lesson series, Grandmaster Chess Lessons. So we've got an interesting game I analyzed from the Aeroflot 2016 tournament in Moscow, Russia. One of my favorite players in recent times, Gata Kamsky, making yet another sort of chess comeback and playing fantastic chess lately. He's playing white against the young Grandmaster from the UAE, Salem. Kamsky rated in the high 2600, Salem just above 2600. Gata is white. He plays e4. He's been playing a lot of things like the London system, non-theoretical openings, but he also plays e4. You have to keep in mind he's capable of playing both e4 or d4. Against myself also in Foxwoods some 8 years ago or something, he played e4 as well. So here, Gata plays e4, Salem plays c5, and Kamsky plays knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4. When Gata does play e4, he's really not afraid to go into relative main lines, but he has his own systems worked out therein. Knight takes d4, knight to f6, knight to c3. I played knight c6 against him. He goes into Richter Rouser, usually after knight to c6. Here against Salem, he faces a6. And here he has a kind of history. So I don't know how much Salem really prepared. I mean, basically, Gata's been playing a lot of London systems, a lot of d4 in US championships and whatnot, trying to avoid theory for the most part. So I think his repertoire is more d4 oriented than e4, and probably Salem was more concerned about what to do against d4. But here he's facing e4, and white plays a4, which isn't a surprise because Gata has played this variation on a regular basis, and he did play, for example, 2 games against Topalov in their candidates match in 2011 in this line. So here Salem chooses a pretty normal move, actually, knight to c6. Personally, if I played the Najdorf and I was facing the move a4, this probably wouldn't be my choice. Normally in the Najdorf, the nice thing is that you have flexibility with a knight on b8. It often goes to d7 and to c5. So the knight on c6 is often in the way in Najdorf type positions, especially in structures where you play e5. So it wouldn't be my choice, although looking in the chess database, black has quite okay scores with pretty much any normal move in this position. e5, g6, e6, any kind of totally normal setup for black is okay. I think Topalov played e5 against Gata in one of those games that they played in 2011. But okay, so Salem plays knight to c6. This brings up an interesting point now. The move a5, which to me is something of a relative modern mystery. I wasn't able to make sure where this actually was invented. I do know that Gata played it himself against Topalov in that match in 2011. Topalov did not take the pawn. He played, I believe, e6 here, which is a very solid choice. And going to kind of Scheveningen type of position, he was able to make a draw. But basically, a5, it's a very, very unusual move. I found only a few instances of it being played in totally random blitz games, and for me, it's just kind of a blip on the radar. It's actually a very interesting move, theoretically, because it tempts Salem to doing what he did in this game. So Topalov declined the opportunity to take the pawn on a5. And I don't know if he knew concrete variations or if he just did it on feel. You know, if a strong player plays a5 in a match like the candidates, you can be pretty sure that this pawn sacrifice is sound. But Salem decided to take Kamsky up on this challenge, so to speak. So he plays here knight takes e5, a5, and instead of Topalov's e6. So it's kind of like, well, what compensation does white have for this pawn? I mean, the knight's a little bit off sides. There's nothing dramatic for white. I mean, you could play maybe bishop g5 and just get some development, but that's not really the point. So the point is this move. I assume this is a computer-generated variation that at some point, in his analysis, Kamsky found with the computer, probably preparing for earlier games. Knight to d5. Now, obviously, he knew about this in 2011 because he played a5 against Topalov. He was probably ready. This was his Topalov preparation, basically. This is where things get interesting now. Obviously, this position has never been reached in a tournament game as far as I know. But Black has several ways to play. The most dangerous one is knight takes e4, trying to win a second pawn. And it's not good. Black is in trouble. And it's not what you would expect. You're looking at maybe the b6 square is weak, and here knight b6 isn't playable, but this square is vulnerable. White could play bishop e3 and put pressure on the b6 square, which I imagine is interesting. But there's a better way for white to play here. A very, very shocking and strong resource for white. Bishop b5 check. After bishop b5 check, Black is basically just flattened, just lost directly. Bishop b5 check, pawn takes b5 check. Bishop d7 is no better for Black there. And bishop takes d7 check, and there's forks at b6. If king takes, there's queen g4 check. This is basically forced. This is very bad for Black. In all lines where the king gets popped out to d7, white will have a queen g4 check type of thing. And when I looked at this, white is like at minimum winning a clear exchange. So it's just really bad for Black. Basically a forced loss. So knight takes e4 is off the table. What can Salem do here? I think the logical thing to do is what he did in the game, which is e6, knight takes f6 check, pawn takes f6. But that's the tempting thing to do. There is possibly an improvement here. So you can play instead knight to c6 right away. And I think this is a critical test for Kamsky's line. Knight back to c6. Now, what does white do? The pawn is hanging at e4. There's two possibilities. White can try to take on f6 and double the pawns, or he can play bishop e3 to go for the sensitive-looking b6 square. There is a threat of knight b5, so that could happen in some positions, but not really in most cases, because Black can take on d5. After this, I looked at knight takes d5 coming up next. So if white plays bishop e3, knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, knight e5, and after the logical move bishop to e2, g6. Black has the retreat back to d7 with his knight in e5, and Black's position is cramped and it's hard to develop actively, but he is down, white is down a pawn here. So I think this is pretty critical, and I can see that white probably has compensation, but it's not that obvious to me what's really going on in the long run. It's a pawn sacrifice, and I'm not sure what's really going on here. Will Kamsky repeat this? Perhaps play this position against a strong player? I don't know. I mean, this is what Black should probably have done. The other possibility for Kamsky, though, is a bit safer. Instead of bishop e3, maybe he intends to play knight takes f6. And after the immediate knight takes f6, g takes f6 would lead us back into basically the same position we had in the game. But Black can probably improve with e takes f6, which really avoids the risk of the game continuation where the Black king isn't safe. I don't think there's really a question of Black, doing anything with his extra pawn in this position, but the fact of the matter is, after this capture, I think the weaker Grandmaster should have good chances to hold an equal position against the stronger Kamsky. So this is a safe way for Black to play. We just play bishop e7 and castles kingside, and I don't really think that white has a whole lot. So that's possibly what will happen in the future after what happened in this game, where Salem played e6 right away, which is a natural kind of blitz move. Knight takes f6 check, pawn takes f6. I noticed that Salem is like 2680 FIDE rated in blitz. So that's pretty strong. I mean, this guy has to be a very, very strong blitz player. And I think that e6 is kind of a blitz reaction to the position without really concretely thinking out all the details. So just kind of gut reaction wasn't really the best. And now we get to an interesting situation which Kamsky had obviously prepared. Bishop d2, knight c6, and then simply knight takes c6, b takes c6. And Kamsky is a pawn down in a position where all the knights are gone. We can call it a knightless middle game. And here it's just a question of structure and king position. So Kamsky has the safer king and the better structure in exchange for one pawn. And, well, you can judge for yourself. I thought that Salem played pretty reasonably here. And I can't really point out a lot of concrete mistakes. Bishop d3, and then white is threatening strategically to play queen h5 in this position, which will just fix the situation with a very powerful piece on h5 that's almost impossible to get rid of. This happens sometimes in the browser also with bishop e2 to h5. So I thought that though it looks a little weakening, basically, I mean, Salem's approach here, the only alternative to h5 is really to play rook g8. Both moves are kind of giving up on castling kingside. h5, Botvinnik type of plan in the Richter-Rauser structure. Castles, and this is Kamsky's plan. I mean, safe king forever. So what if we're down a pawn? It's a double pawn. The black king has problems. If things open up, black will be worse. So d5. This is enforced, but black needs a structure he can work with. He needs places to put his pieces, and I think that d5 is absolutely as good as anything here. Bishop a5, freezing the pawn on a6, attacking the black queen. So queen d6. It reminds me a little bit of some kind of Chigorin type of position. Queen d6, and then bishop c3, hitting the weak pawn on f6. So Kamsky manages to just kind of induce the black pawns to come forward. Bishop e7, Salem very controlled there, not playing e5 right away. And then rook a4. The temptation here is to play something like f4, which would be very risky actually for white. So Kamsky understands not to give black any sort of counterplay. He doesn't open up his king, despite, I mean, the obvious temptation of playing f4. It's just not necessary. So this is really, really instructive what Gata does here. He focuses in on the only weakness, the pawn on a6, the only really blatant weakness, the pawn on a6. And he doesn't give black any counterplay at all. Very prophylactic and very risk-free, basically. e5, queen e2, focusing on a6. And then bishop g4. I thought this was a good move by Salem to provoke Kamsky to weaken his king side a little bit. Of course, the a6 pawn is already overloaded, attacked 3 times, so Salem really can't expect to protect that pawn in the long run, and finally it takes some pressure off the h5 pawn. So I thought everything pretty reasonable for Salem here. f3, weakening the king side a bit, and then bishop e6. Hard to say. I mean, maybe could d7 be a better square? The problem is the black king. It almost looks like Kamsky sort of just choreographed the plot line of this game 100% by himself in analysis like 5 years ago, and the game just played out exactly the way he wanted. He just wrote the plot for this game. Salem played reasonable moves. Bishop e6, king h1, excellent prophylactic move, and then h4, which looks logical, and Gata stops that. So more prophylactic play, no counterplay, h3, rook to g8. I'm not sure about this move, but it's difficult to find a plan for black. And f5 is impossible. So there's really no way for black to use these pawns to open up the position for his bishops in the center. Rook on f to a1, and black is starting to have trouble finding a plan here. Tactically, he has to watch out. He wanted to play, like, to sacrifice a piece on h3, but queen d7, for example, he could play here queen d7. If you look at this variation, there would be dangers of, for example, pawn takes pawn, bishop b5. So this is really a huge tactical consideration. And that's why he doesn't want to put his queen on d7. So Salem played queen b8. And then more positional play by Kamsky, not the routine b3, which I would think would be okay for white. Instead, he played more aggressively here with b4. And black could play a5 in this position, which is an interesting move. But instead, play sensibly here with bishop d7, defending c6, threatening to discover with c5. Kamsky now takes the pawn. He's got a pawn back. Rook takes a6, rook takes a6, rook takes a6. And the next pawn on b4 isn't really hanging because of the rook on g8. So bishop takes b4, bishop takes b4, queen takes b4, rook a8 check, picks up the rook on g8. So no time to take the pawn on b4. Queen c8 hitting the rook, threatening bishop takes h3, which would be winning by force. But Kamsky has this move, queen f1. Just calmly consolidating, defending. Everything's fine. Everything's fine here for white. Queen f1, bishop d8. And this doesn't really threaten anything, of course, bishop d8. Just wants to make a square for his king at e7. But now it's really, I guess this is lost now. b5 gives Kamsky the final way of breaking through to the black king. Bishop e1. Principle of weaknesses, two weaknesses. Kamsky attacking on both flanks, basically. Now black regretting that he played rook g8, perhaps. Rook h8. Bishop f2, bishop's looking both ways. Kamsky just incrementally, like Karpov, improving his position. And then d4. The black pawns get, sorry about that, the black pawns get less and less, just less and less flexible now. They're looking weak. h4, c6, f6, e5, d4. White could break the pawn chain with c3, possibly even f4, but he doesn't want to weaken his king side. So Gata manages to open it up without any risk to himself whatsoever. King h2, overprotecting h3. Bishop c7, opposite that white king, and then b5. Salem would like to play f5 somehow, but it just doesn't matter. f5, Kamsky just ignores it. You know, he doesn't give him any kind of discoveries. And meanwhile, white's breaking through on the queen side positionally. b5, just fantastic strategic play by Kamsky. This is essentially trading off his bad bishop while breaking through to the exposed black king. cb5, bishop takes b5. And now suddenly you see f6 is weak. So Gata's not only won his pawn back, now he's threatening to go up material with rook takes f6. And there is a weakness at c2, but black just not in position to take advantage of that at the moment with his king in the middle of the board. And this was Kamsky's whole script, his whole plan when he played this pawn sacrifice, which he probably prepared for Topalov in 2011. The plan just to exploit the black king in the center while the white king is safe. It's just a free roll for white. He's just got every chance to attack the black king while his king just sits there without any problems at all. Bishop takes b5, king e7. You know, there's no one move by Salem I can really condemn as a mistake in this game. King e7 is reasonable, and then the bishop again, bishop e1, threatening h4, threatening bishop b4 check. It's really ugly. So black realizes that at this point, bishop d6 is no good because of rook a7. At this point, he has to give up a pawn. A very important pawn at f6. And white is winning now. King f8 trades the bad bishop. Bishop takes d7. Queen takes d7. Rook takes f6. And in my experience, when you're down a pawn against Kamsky, it's over. I lost a pawn against him in the middle game. I just resigned because he has a reputation for relentless technique and incredible endurance. There's no way he's going to make a mistake. And he can outlast, you know, forever here. You cannot tire him out. Incredible energy. Rook takes f6, and then rook h5 was a good try, but Kamsky up to the task here. Queen c4 is good. This is also good. Queen a6, very active move. And you see the black king never really safe. So king g7. At this point, Kamsky can win with rook h6, but he was just taking his time, making sure everything's solid. First he plays bishop d2. Rook h6 now a threat. Bishop d8. So here, that's where I meant he can play rook h6 in this position. Rook h6, definitely winning. Same as in the game. Kamsky takes a move here to make sure and consolidate. So he plays rook d6. Not necessary, but not a mistake at the same time. Should play rook h6 right away. That's what I meant to say the move before. Rook to d6, queen c7, rook c6, and then he sees it. Rook h6. So he didn't really miss the opportunity to play this move, although he didn't play it right away. This wins by force. So there's nothing that black can do to really avoid. He tries a nice trick here. Rook g5. This was really a fantastic try for Salem to sack the exchange to get counterplay against Kamsky's king. Kamsky just shuts it down. He doesn't take the exchange. He ignores it. He plays instead queen d6, when a trade of queens would obviously refute the exchange sacrifice. Queen e8. Now black's very passive, and Kamsky simply takes this pawn. Rook takes h4. Now, and the point is queen h6 is a huge mating threat in this position. So rook takes g2 check doesn't work. Rook takes g2 check, king takes g2. If this, we just simply take, and then if black takes on h4, queen h6 check picks up the loose bishop. So that variation isn't playable for black. That was Salem's only hope, and instead, after rook g6, he's 2 pawns down. It's unbelievable. I mean, he went from pawn up to 2 pawns down. That's 3 pawns difference, and we don't even know where the pawns went. I mean, it doesn't even seem like black made any concrete mistakes except for taking this pawn in the opening. Rook g6 and then rook g4, just killing the counterplay altogether, trading the last active piece. Rook to g4, rook takes g4, and then Kamsky again accurate to the last. Doesn't give black any counterplay with checks on the h-file. He just takes back with the f-pawn. And this keeps the king snug with those 3 pawns to protect it. No open files near the white king. F takes g, and then king g8 and g5 when black is 2 pawns down against Gata Kamsky with no compensation. It's over and he resigned. This fantastic game was, I think, a positional masterpiece, and also shows pretty smart preparation on Kamsky's part in this kind of practical variation of the Najdorf with a4, kind of anti-theory variation that a lot of players tend to play with white who don't want to have to learn the very, very deep intricacies of sharp lines of the Najdorf. So positionally oriented players playing a4, maybe g3 is another line that you can avoid the ultra sharp Najdorf variations, but good choice by Kamsky. He shows he was prepared. Hopefully down the line we'll get to see another test of this line where somebody else can try to improve on Salem's play in the opening. I'm International Master William Paschall. Thanks for joining me here on my YouTube channel, Video Chess Training. This was Grandmaster Chess Lessons Part 4, and welcome to the channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Bye-bye.